This is Hobknobbing, which I started last week, and we're going to see if we can edit this out as I'm reading through it. The main things I want to change, there's a point in the story where a character has to decide to come back and fight, and I want that motivation to be a little bit stronger, maybe a little more poignant. We'll see what we can do with it. And then the final scenes of the story, I kind of ran over pretty quick, so probably those sequences need to be fleshed out a little bit. Don't want to overdo it, but do want there to be a little more to that battle at the end. So we'll see how this goes. Let's jump right in. Hobnobbing by J. Wilburn. They were too young to be heroes, but 5 of them showed up at midnight anyway. Lark was the only girl in the group that night. She did not believe the women or girls. Let's say and here. She did not believe the women and girls of Primrose Village were any less brave than the boys, but Lark believed they lacked faith in the ability of the surviving men or youth of the village to change their situation for the better. Byron said only 5. It was long odds before, but now she could hear it in his voice. He didn't want to be the one to say it, but he was looking for an out. He wanted the others to talk him out of this fight. Durden, Lark's brother, said, "It was a mad plan from the start. I'll not be the one to see my sister dead because I couldn't admit we were beaten." "Before we even started," Meldrum said. Hartcliffe took in a breath, and he looked at Lark as he prepared to speak. They were all looking at her. "I'll be damned if I'm your excuse to give up on what you know must be done," she said. Lark pulled on her leather hood and mask, as if that were the end of it. Her mask was had a long ebony beak like that of a plague bird. Hartcliffe shook his head. "You'd go alone, Lark?" She spoke muffled through the mask. "You'd let me go alone, would you?" Durden said, "I'll have you come back to our father's cottage. Our father was skinned by the hobnobs. His bones used to block us in their feeding corral we still call a village, like hogs calling the slaughterhouse home." She took a step toward him. "Our mother stood between us and—" Durden shoved her backward with a level of force he would clobber any other boy for using against her. "I know what happened. Don't shame me with it. I showed up same as you." Her brother took out his own leather mask, but did not put it on yet. All right. Byron nodded and said, "They used my father's bones as well, and someday they will use mine if we don't take the fight to them." Byron covered, let me put an ED on here real quick. Byron covered his head with the leather mask of a wolf before the others could protest. I'll say the leather mask of a wolf in mid-snarl before the others could protest. "I'll not be their feed," Hartcliffe said. Durden finally donned the leather mask of a wildcat. Mel and Hart put on theirs to finish off the debate. Mel was a narrow leather fox, while Hart's mask showed the black fangs of a leather serpent. They were an army of 5. Now, I don't ever actually explain why they're putting on these particular masks, so maybe that's something that needs to be added, but for now I'm just going to leave it up to the audience to decide what that's about. If it means something to the village, if it's some sort of superstition, whatever it may be, I haven't spelled that out in the story. "We'll have to split up with so few of us," Byron said without his mask. "We have a lot of ground to cover in one night, and it might turn bad quickly." "It's been bad for years, generations," Lark said. Her brother took hold of her shoulder. "You pushed us into it fine. No need to keep selling once we are sold. My sister and I will go south. The rest of you take the other points of the compass, and we'll work our way around, come what may." They split apart and left Primrose in 4 directions. When Durden turned southwest, Lark tried to go southeast. He seized her shoulder and pulled her along with him. "Stay with me." "We agreed to split up," she said. "I let them do as they liked. I'm not agreeing to send you out in the darkness alone." "If you are scared of the dark, brother, there's no reason to make up an excuse to keep me with you." Let's say make up a story. Make up a story to keep me with you. All right, I think that reads better. All right, whatever you want to tell yourself, just stay with me like I told you. They weaved between the trees that still constituted the small circle of land that was their territory, maybe their outdoor prison. Moonlight leaked weak through the thick canopy overhead. On occasion, Lark saw her breath cloud into one of the shafts of light, breaking through a bare branch. A bare, let's say, section of branch. I think that adds a little bit of clarity. Maybe just adds words, who knows. Even in the deep darkness of the silverleaf forest at night, they spied the first bone tree. The hobnobs had planted the arm and leg bones into X's that sunk deep into the bark. Above those, the skull had been pressed into the wood like the dead man or woman had decided to bite the tree with their upper jaw. The lower jawbone was tangled in the roots. "Are we ready for this?" he asked. She answered by drawing her dagger and prying the barrier bones away from the trunk of the tree. He joined her with his own blade. All right, let me add some sensory detail here. The smell, the aroma of wounded sap filled the dark air. All right. Let me switch this around a little bit. The wounded sap filled the dark air with the smell of green. All right, that's better. Bone, metal, and wood created a screeching sound that surely gave away their position. All right, now we'll need a new paragraph here. All right, that's better. I think that adds a little more to the story. As she crushed the loose bones under her feet, he finished digging the finger bones out of the bark. She broke the skull with her heel. It made a hollow pop, and he cast the smaller bones as far as he could throw them out in the deep woods. "Do you want to see if we can step through?" Okay, let's say she could not read his expression through the mask and darkness. All right, I probably used darkness way too many times in this story, but that's something I can fix later. "I want to finish the work." He turned toward the next bone tree along the southern perimeter. All right. She followed. The next arrangement of bones was fresher. She could smell the greasy stink of aging blood on them. Bits of rotting meat and hair stuck from them. She heard dripping. Lark held her breath as she tried to take the ward down quickly. She was already breaking them before they could fall to the ground. She knew which friends had been harvested most recently. If she really paid attention to the size of the bones or the nature of the remaining hair, she could probably figure out exactly who this victim had been. A scream from across the village carried shrill through the night air. They both turned to look as if they could see that far. The noise was full, and then it was nothing. I need a comma there, I think, technically. All right. Who do you think, Lark asked. "Doesn't matter," he said. "We started, no choice but to finish." She made short work of her friend's skull upon a rock, and they went after the next tree and the next. I think Durden shut himself up and crouched. Shut himself up 2 words in and crouched. She knew better than to ask what was wrong. Something crunched beyond the barrier they had taken down. Then the hoots that weren't owls. He shoved her into the scarred... Okay, let's not into. Let's say against. He shoved her against the scarred bark of a tree they'd just deboned. He put his back to another. The footfalls came heavy and shook the ground enough for Lark to feel under her boots and through the tree at her back. She could not see the hob's body, but a foot with 6 toes stretched into her view and toyed with the bone shards they had just broken apart. A hand with 6 clawed fingers came around the tree. She dropped to her haunches, quick enough to avoid being grabbed. Her brother made to move toward her and the threat, but she flicked up her hand at him, not far enough out to be seen around the side of the ruined tree, but enough for him to get the message to hold tight. The claws ran over the indentions in the tree over her head. All right, that's 2 overs, so let's say above. Above her head. Yes, okay. Bits of wood dust and splinters fell onto the leather hood over her head. Let's say covering, because again, don't want a bunch of overs. Covering her head. The taps sounded much like rain upon the mossy shingles of their roof. Then the hobnob leaned down into her view and revealed the shape of its head and snout. It turned its yellow eyes with reptilian slits onto her. That sickly glow from within was the brightest light in the night. In this night, let's say. In this night. It showed discolored fangs as, okay, say the hob. The hob showed its discolored fangs as bluish lips peeled back. Its breath stunk. Fix that real quick. Its breath stunk of rotten meat, and there was only one kind of meat she had seen them eat. One kind of meat she had ever... wrong place. Only one kind of meat she had ever seen them eat. This was the closest she had ever been to one, and it meant death. As its claws tore down through the bark of the boneless tree, its hoot turned to the first note of a roar, but then cut off to a hiss of air as Lark's dagger drove into its exposed throat. Then she wrenched the blade from side to side, spilling hobnob blood like tar. The beast rolled over to its back with a thunderous impact. The yellow eyes still glowed with surprise at being killed by something he surely thought of as a midnight snack. All right. More anxious hooting filled the forest around them, too many of them. Another grabbed Durden from around his tree and lifted him off the ground. He tried to cut the thick wrist of the creature, but it knocked the blade out of her brother's grasp. She bolted from her tree, but something took a crushing grip on her ankle. The hoot of the thing that had hold of her turned into a childish scream that scared her even more. The beast leapt into the air, and she flipped completely over 2.5 times before landing on her back. She rolled to her stomach and saw her brother 10 feet in the air before he dropped to a crouch landing. He crawled back toward his tree and retrieved his blade from the leafy ground. Lark had no understanding of what was happening. The hobnobs ran past her, hooting as they went. They acted like they had no interest in her or the destruction she and her brother had done to their bone barrier. In the chaos, That was confusing. In the chaos, her mind went to the idea that they were going to harvest more villagers in their... the stampeding hobs. All right. Let me make sure that makes sense. In the chaos, her mind went to the idea that the stampeding hobs were going to harvest more villagers in their sleep to replace the bones Lark and her brother had broken. She lashed out from side to side, cutting the monster's legs. let's say as they passed. As they passed, they yapped like village dogs, but made no effort to fight back. They tried to keep running, most did, leaving a trail of thick blood. Two fell to their faces as her blade found and severed tendons. They rolled over and covered their faces. She swore she heard them sobbing. Then she saw the other things. A cold presence like an off-season wind passed over her and lifted the two injured Hobbs. They screamed and cried as the shadow thing lifted them into the sky. Others still on the run didn't make it far as more shadow creatures harvested upon the hobnobs like those monsters had done to the villagers for generations. I'll put a comma there. All right. What's happening? She whispered. I don't know. Her brother pulled his mask off, showing his pale, sweaty face. There are more monsters beyond the bone barrier of the Hobbs than we ever imagined. Maybe we should have left this all in. He snatched into the air. She screamed inside her leather mask as he lifted away in the grasp of a shadow monster. Blood rained down. His blade fell and stabbed into the ground a few paces away. All right. Durden, no. Run. His voice echoed from above and all around her like the words of God. Go beyond the barrier and do not stop. He had told her not to leave his side when this night began. I won't, she whispered with no voice behind her words. Go, run, he shouted as he seemed to be ascending into the heavens, responding as if he actually heard her protest. Another cold presence swept past her and rustled her clothing. She turned and ran southward as her brother had ordered her to do. She felt nothing as she passed. She felt, let's say, no resistance. No magical resistance as she passed the defanged bone trees. Okay, so this implies that there was some kind of barrier or resistance caused by the bones before, but now it's not there, so they took the bones off the trees. It was beyond strange to be past the magic barrier the terrible Hobbs had kept around the village. Now something more terrible had fallen upon them. She dodged between the trees and kept to her feet. Let's say even as. Not usually good to add adverbs and adjectives, but I think it helps here. Even as vines tried and failed to tangle her in the darkness. Thorns cut at her skin, but she continued headlong to the south. She came upon a trail and skid to a halt. The toe of her boot found a wagon rut that had begun to refill. An entire civilization that knew nothing of the plight of Primrose Village might be within walking distance. There weren't many elders left, but those who were claimed, that beyond the Silverleaf Forest was the Torbank River. Then wide grounds without trees. They said you could see for miles in any direction. Lark could not imagine such a thing. How would you even live there? Beyond that, the kingdom of Halvarine that used to control the land, let's say here, and beyond even the Silverleaf Forest. That was before the hobnobs, the few elders, would say. This road might take her there. All right, might take her there. As her eyes adjusted to the great moonlight above this trail, she was able to make out the shape of a broken wagon off to the right in a deeper ditch. The wood was shiny like slime, and the shape was fuzzy with patches of black moss. Hey man, thanks for being here. All right. Whatever this wagon had once been to its owner, it was ruined now. What did she want beyond these woods? Empty ground, lifeless land. She started this night to save her village, and the night wasn't over. All right, now here I want to kind of add a little more motivation to her deciding to go back to fight. So let's say let's say, no, Lark could not bring herself to believe that danger ended at the edge of the woods, nor could she convince herself that this lonely trail led to heaven. I'll say paradise. Led to paradise beyond some river. Broken wagons did not speak of greatness. Did not speak of greatness to her. All right. I don't know if that does the job, but it kind of gives her motivation. She ran back the way she came. Lark should have been exhausted, but she ran northward harder than she had fled south. She reached the last place she had seen her brother before he was harvested by the new monster. Lark could make no sense of this, coming back to the exact same point in a blind run, like fate maybe. She drew her brother's short sword from the dirt and charged her own village with 2 blades. After 3 steps, she pulled to another halt. It wasn't cowardice, but a hunch instead. She sheathed her dagger and picked up a broken leg bone with a sharp point. Lark resumed her charge with a sword and a sharp bone. Charged, let's say armed. Armed with a sword and a sharp bone. She passed the broken body parts of Hobknob. Seeing them scattered in pieces brought her dark joy. Alright, this final scene, I'm going to need to add some stuff in. As she entered the village, she heard human screams inside the cottages. Terror had filled the night for everyone. Now this was her responsibility, because she chose to don the mask when others would not. One of the shadow wraiths, let's say shadowy wraiths, skimmed the roof of a cottage, scattering wood shingles older than her, maybe not as old as the broken wagon upon the forgotten trail to the south. The wraith circled over her head and dove at her in the empty street. She wanted with all her heart to use her brother's sword, but she lifted the sharp bone instead. The point cut into the shadow and furrowed it. The wraith screamed in some combination of pain and rage. It spired up into the night sky, fluttering in shreds that made the stars behind it wink in and out around its ragged form. More dove toward her again and again. And again she brandished the bone. Okay, here's where I need to add a little more. Upon the road, she spied another dark shape and thought one of the shadow creatures was crawling toward her. Hey Zach, thanks for dropping in, man. No, you're not late, you're just here. Alright. Upon the shadow creature, one of the shadow creatures was crawling toward her. When it didn't move or rise, she stepped closer. With the point of her brother's short sword, she lifted what turned out to be I'm using the word shredded too much, but I may have to just replace that later, to be a shredded robe. It could have been her brother's or one of the other unlucky 5. She looked up to... No more looks. She turned her face to the night sky where they had taken Durden. One of the wraiths was in a had nearly reached her in a silent power dive. Is power dive one word? Nope, it's 2. All right. From instinct, she raised both hands. The sword was... Oh, I don't need to put was. The sword deflected aside, but the bone impaled the shadow. Now the dark thing screamed. Say the dark thing broke its silence with a cagey scream. It rustled upon the end of the bone before pulling itself free but much diminished. It was not much more than the ruined robe upon the street as it scuttled away close to the ground. Alright, let's see if I can get away with glossing over the rest of it here. Let's see. Moore dove toward her, and again she brandished the deadly bone. Let's see, that was 2. Let's make it keep it 4. Apparently 4 wounded was all they needed to take the hint. The shadow creatures spiraled out from the village into the night. Among the branches of the trees. All right. 2 more figures approached her from the darkness. Lark held up the sword and the bone, not knowing which one she needed yet. It was Byron and Hartcliffe. They had shed their masks and hoods, but Lark made no move to remove hers yet. "Have you seen my brother?" They both said no. What were those?" Hart asked. "They entered our territory as soon as we took down the bones of the Hobnob wards," Byron said. Hart shook his head. "Were the Hobs protecting us from them?" Lark growled like one of the monsters. Let's see. And then said... I don't want to make it sound like her entire sentence is like a monster growl. Alright, "They fed on us and used our bones like a fence around livestock." Another shape crawled into the street and approached the surviving trio. It bled like tar. The injured Hob hooted at them and made a garble of noises that might have been words. What does it want? Hart stepped away. Maybe it's apologizing, Byron said, or seeking mercy. Lark marched toward the throttled Hobnob and lifted both her brother's sword and the sharp point of bone above its back. The Hob bowed its head at her feet and continued its garbled words. She stabbed downward with both metal and bone. The conversation ended. As the first light broke beyond the trees to the east, Byron asked, Do we stay here, or do we try to move away from this cursed, let's not say village, let's say place. Lark didn't have an answer. How wide did curses extend into the greater world? She retrieved the blade and bone from the dead Hobnob's back. Then she went to look for her brother. Wherever he might be. Okay. Not sure that's perfect yet, but I added in a little bit more of what I thought was missing. And I think it has a solid beginning, middle, and end. I think it has a good protagonist. I think there's layers to the story and all of that.